We're live. Okay. We're not.
Not live yet. Yeah, I got a YouTube notification that it was live. Uh, uh, Different event. Did you go live on the right event? Because I see two of them. Um, LinkedIn, I don't see live. I think you've gone live on the wrong link thing. No? Let me double check. What RMTP data are you using? We tested it the other night.
LinkedIn is live. It's just got that holding screen.
Well,
That was supposed to
wrong
do.
event. It's the wrong event on LinkedIn.
Is it?
People can hear the audio.
No, it's just on the screen. Mhm. I can't hear anything through my phone. Well, I did have the volume down, so now I've turned the
People can
volume
hear
up.
the
I still
audio.
can't hear anything. So just the holding screen.
I think we can hear Aaron. I think we can hear Aaron.
Good afternoon. I think we're live. I'm hoping the technical gremlins have left us alone. Welcome to the first webinar of the UK OSINT Community. I'm really delighted today to welcome Jacob Lloyd from the Animal Welfare Investigation Project. He's going to give us a really interesting talk. But the first thing I want to do is introduce the UK OSINT Community and tell you what it's all about. So our goal here at the UK OSINT Community, Open Source Intelligence, is to capture the latest and the best tradecraft, tools and talent from the world of OSINT to help educate and inspire UK OSINT professionals and people that are new to the field. So we're volunteer-led, we're a not-for-profit organisation, and you can join freely. When you join our organisation, you get access to our Slack and our Discord channels, depending on where you're based, and then you get priority access to our in-real-life events. We've got a couple of events coming up. There's one in a couple of weeks in Fulham as part of the International Security Expo, and you'll also get access to news and updates from us as we move forward and grow the community and hopefully foster and collaborate to improve open source intelligence within the United Kingdom. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jacob. Jacob, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Animal Welfare Investigation Project is and how you got started?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be part of this community from very early on, and it's great to spread that tradecraft knowledge and experience. A bit about me. I will go into a bit more detail, but we've been around since 2021. Although I've been doing this probably about 12 years or so. But in summary, we investigate organized animal crimes, and I'll probably touch on a bit more in the presentation about how we do that and what we investigate.
No, awesome. I think we're going to be in for a really interesting presentation because having seen a little bit of the content, I think it's really going to touch people in ways and probably inspire quite a lot of people to take action themselves when it comes to this kind of thing. So I guess what we'll touch on is what's a normal day when it comes to open source intelligence for you, and are there any particular areas or specialisms that you tend to leverage or use, or is there anything that you need support with? I think I might have lost our esteemed guest. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. We lost Jacob for a moment. I'm sure he's going to rejoin us any moment now. So I mentioned our event in a couple of weeks, so let's touch on that a little bit more. So it's Tuesday, 24th of September. It's being held in Fulham, which is just down the road from where the International Security Expo is going to be held. If you're interested, you can visit osint.uk, where you can register, and we'll be looking forward to welcoming you to our first Unplugged event. This is a networking opportunity for people that are OSINT professionals to come together, share some ideas, meet each other, start talking, have a beer or two if you're so inclined. And our next seminar with talks and the opportunity for more education is going to be announced this coming week. And we're also going to be announcing some other events further afield from London. So those of you north of the border might be quite interested to see what's coming up this week. As we move forward into 2025 as well, we're planning on doing a lot more webinars. So we've already announced our next webinar, which is with Agent G9 from the scam baiting community. I'm sure that's going to be a really fascinating talk. I can't wait to talk to him and find out how he got involved in attacking scammers and everything. And just as I need him, he is back.
My apologies. My sincere apologies.
Technical issues, and this is our first attempt to go in live. So, so I was going to ask you,
Okay.
what's a normal day when you're using open source intelligence, and is there any particular areas or specialisms that you rely on or need support with?
Sure. So yeah, a typical day for us is a mixture of proactive monitoring of certain groups online, mixed with specific targeting of individual profiles that we're looking at. So it's a bit of a mixture. We predominantly focus a lot on social media, so that's a heavy focus for us, and also some online forums. So we've got a mixture of those.
Amazing. Okay, and before we get into your case study, because I know this is going to be great, As I say, are there any examples of really successful investigations or impact that AWIP's had from the AWIP?
Yeah, so we've been involved in over 160 investigations just in the last 6 months. So yeah, quite a few investigations ongoing and already completed. In terms of really successful results, I mean, we've had some good prosecutions in the UK on ear cropping. We've had some good unlicensed breeding prosecutions. So a really wide spectrum of prosecutions from
That's
across the
amazing.
board.
Really, really great work. Okay, then I guess let's not beat around the bush. And before the technical gremlins gets again, if you want to jump into the case study,
Sure.
I can't
All
wait
right.
to hear it.
Okay, cool. All right. You will have to let me know if you can see my screen.
I believe you
You
should have
probably
access.
2 seconds.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Can you see just the presentation, not my notes?
Yes.
Don't forget anything. All right, great. Well, yeah, I'll start with a bit about me. I'm the founder and executive director, as already said. We've been involved in over 1,000 investigations in the last 12 years. So we've done a few. Um, I'm certified as an animal cruelty investigator from the Uni of Missouri in the United States. I sort of specialize in investigating predominantly animal fighting, but also puppy dealing, organized crime groups, and we've really sort of heavily focused on that in the last 4 years. Um, Definitely hated by most of the opposition, but liked by only a few, and that is a massive compliment for me. So. And last but not least, outside of work, I've got 3 horses and 3 dogs who keep me entertained, and this is one of my horses by there.
When do you sleep?
Never. You know. Um, a bit about the organisation. So we focus on legal puppy trade, wildlife crime, and animal fighting as a whole. We take a more sort of proactive intelligence-led approach to investigate and organise animal cruelty. So it really does begin with OSINT for us in many cases. So we collect and analyse that information, we develop it into intelligence, and I'll explain why I think there's a bit of a difference between information and intelligence, and then we'll launch investigations, full-scale investigations, with a view to either supporting and or bringing a prosecution. In the UK, we launch our own prosecutions, but in the US, we provide intelligence to state agencies. And then lastly, we do get to rescue animals too, which is the fun part. Before we jump into OSINT, I just wanted to briefly touch on dogfighting. There is 2 images in here which are a little bit graphic, not overly. I've kept the horrible stuff out of it, but the content is a little bit graphic. So I do apologize for that, but I think it's important to explain what we're up against. Dogfighting is probably the most heinous form of animal abuse imaginable. It involves repeated breeding and reckless breeding of dogs for fighting purposes. It involves caging, chaining, confining of the dogs in isolation and cruel environments. Withholding of affection, using brutal training methods are all things that take place in the dogfighting world. And probably what was shocking to me when I started to investigate this was the connection between drugs, firearms, gambling, human trafficking, all of those things, but also the use of drugs and steroids to enhance performance in dogs was kind of surprising to me and really horrifying. Some of the recent trends that I will say is all from OSINT, so we've picked this up from using OSINT. Upwards of 16,000 dogs are killed each year in dogfighting in the United States alone. We don't have the data for other countries, but at the moment we do have some anecdotal evidence of that. We suspect that over 40,000 individuals are involved in dogfighting in the United States alone, so it's quite a scale of a problem that many people do not even realize it still exists. Dogfighting generates between 10 and 80 grand for a single fight, so there's a lot of money to be made. In a recent federal case, a puppy as young as 11 weeks old was killed and dismembered and also decapitated because they didn't feel the dog was good enough. Dogs as young as 6 months old being electrocuted with car jump leads is another one that we're seeing. This is a really common thing that we've seen actually in many, many cases. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the use of illicit drugs, and this has been a common theme throughout dogfighting for many years. This is a typical pit where the dogs are pitted against each other. So yeah, just standard wooden pit, normally in a basement, but could be held elsewhere. But this is very typical. And then moving on, this is a poor little dog from a raid in a federal raid. We weren't involved in the raid itself, but this was in South Carolina, I believe, and this little dog was found. You'll notice the blue barrels. These are very common where they're chained and they're put outside with these blue barrels, and they live in these blue barrels. All right, let's talk about OSINT. So I'm going to just delve into two things. What is OSINT for us? Because I think definitions are different across the board sometimes. And then secondly, why OSINT is valuable to us. So this is what OSINT is for us. So the gathering, analyzing, and utilizing from public available sources. Here are some of the sources we use. Social media platforms, big one for us, as I said. Online forums, again, a really big one for us. And satellite imagery, I would say, is also a big one for us. I think it's important to remember here, and this is where I wanted to put a bit of a caveat, is that I don't feel anything is intelligence until it's been analyzed and graded. I say that it's only information. So a lot of this stuff for me is just information, and then we do the extra bits of processing it to convert it into intelligence.
Completely agree with that.
That's what I was sort of taught. So yeah, all right. So why is it valuable to us? I mean, it's a big one. We're an NGO, so cost efficiency is important. We're spending donors' money and we want to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck. So it requires minimal resources compared to other tactics that we use. So that's really useful to us. Real-time intelligence, as things are unfolding, we're able to gather extra information and intelligence, which can help us then guide on-the-ground efforts. It's wide-reaching. We can sit in the UK and look at stuff in the US, and we can sit in the US and look at stuff in the UK. But also it helps us to cover a wider net too, just generally speaking, which is fantastic because it allows us to then the next part identify trends and networks. And lastly, if you're maintaining your OPSEC, then it's pretty discreet. We haven't got multiple vehicles on the ground which may alert perpetrators, which is fantastic. We're minimizing that footprint.
Do you find that when you're on the ground doing these sorts of investigations that there is a dramatically increased physical threat?
Yeah, 100%. Aaron, you're right, and we have had cases where we have been assaulted. We have had firearms pointed at us before now. So yeah, there's absolutely an increased threat, and actually OSINT allows us to minimize that threat too, by collecting as much information and being more targeted. And I'll give you a very quick example. Actually, the case study at the end where I'll talk about how we came to gather enough for a warrant. Through OSINT research and public databases, we found out that he had previous firearms offences. And that obviously, and then there was an image of him that he shared with a firearm. So we now knew that this guy had access to firearms, even though he had previous felony convictions for firearms. Helps us to then plan what we're going to do on our approach. So for us, using OSINT as an intelligence source, we use a bit of all of these. For us, OSINT Industries, Scope Now, Authenticate, all these things we use as specialized software. Google Dorking, another one, we all know about it. We use it every day, probably. It's our bread and butter, right? Media tools, so on and so forth. And for us, more specifically, dog breeding registries. These people want to share in the dog fighting world. They want to share successes and wins of their dogs so that they can gain more money out of them. So they'll share that online.
Do you find that this is also solely on the surface web, or does this also venture into areas like the dark web as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the surface web is where we find the majority of it. And we have done some research into dark web content, and we can't find it as much. And whether that's because it's not there, or whether it's because maybe we just don't have the skills, and maybe one of you can come and volunteer and help us. I don't know. My gut feeling is that you can find so much on the surface web they don't even need to go on the dark web, and that's because of enforcement challenges.
That makes sense.
So for us, this is the process that we go through every single investigation. So we create a collection plan, we identify key search terms and keywords, we set up alerts and real-time monitoring as much as we can. It's becoming a little bit more difficult with social media, but yeah, we can monitor some stuff. And then we look at corroboration or triangulating data. Then we analyze it and convert it into products, which then we can then use for whatever we need to do. Just to touch on a few things, when we're creating collection plans, we look at stuff like data impact assessments, and we're looking at ethical and legal considerations. I think it's really important that whilst OSINT is publicly available information, there should really be a purpose for the reason why we're collecting it, and that we're not just on some form of fishing expedition. Horizon scanning is great, but if we're really targeting individuals, in my opinion, we should be considering those implications. I also like to look at keywords and search terms very early on, so learning lingo and slang. In the dogfighting world, they use game dog, scratch lines, yards, yards just being a kennel. But you might not, originally think of that. Game dog being one which is for fighting, and so on and so forth. So learning those slangs, whatever they are relevant to you, for me is also really key. And then lastly, just I wanted to touch on the product production side. I always feel that, OSINT has to have a purpose. If we're going to do it, it's got to have a purpose. And so for us, really focusing on what does the end product need? And once we get to the product, identifying the intelligence gaps. And by product, I mean stuff like we produce person of interest profiles, subject profiles, strategic assessments, and those sorts of summaries. That's what we use. I hope that makes sense.
I understood. Hope our audience will.
Okay, cool. So the next part I wanted to talk about was converting OSINT into real world action, which is what we use it for as a whole. So we use OSINT to target surveillance and undercover operations. So we look at identifying key locations, key individuals, mapping criminal networks, and we also have used OSINT to avoid detection during surveillance as well. The third point, the one I missed because I wanted to just quickly expand on it a little bit more, was around pinpoint and optimal times for surveillance. I think we can all understand the idea of doing more with less. With our clients, in the case of in your private world, place demands on you, with budgets. And in the NGO sector, we have budgets too. We don't have an unlimited pot of money. So I think this is really key that if we're going to combine OSINT with real world applications, then we must be really focused, and OSINT allows us to do that.
So is that something where you talk about like pattern of life analysis and understanding when your target is most likely to be somewhere where you can do the surveillance rather than wasting your time and resources when they're not going to be available?
Yeah, and I'll quickly touch on that as we go through. But yeah, that's exactly it, is that we're looking at pattern of life. So yeah, key locations, we're able to use social media to identify home addresses, kennel addresses, and check-ins of a person. I'm still amazed by what people share online. It amazes me that people overshare and they think they're safe, especially in a private Facebook group, which is kind of interesting. But there we are. Using tools like Google Earth and Google Maps, save us a lot of money. We're able to look at locations. Okay, sometimes it's a bit outdated, and you might have to get somebody on the ground to have a look, but it can save us a lot of money. And also satellite imagery, if we're deploying static observation cameras, which we do quite a lot, to monitor kennels. then satellite imagery allows us to have a look at locations and landscapes to where we can deploy static cameras. And again, similar as what we've covered. For identifying key individuals, social media username tracking is a big one for us. It seems that dogfighters as a whole seem to use the same username for everything. I don't know if that's what you experience, but that's definitely what we experience.
I think it's quite
And
similar to like I guess cybercrime forums and I guess like
oh, is it?
thinking like dark
Okay.
web marketplaces for drug sales. Always like you have like that brand identity, I guess, which is what people rely on.
Yeah. Yeah. It does appear like a bit of a personal brand. And then, but for us it makes it a little bit easier to track. Um and then lastly for us, a bit of open forums. I have included dark web monitoring there because, I think it's important in terms of for OSINT, but for us it's not as a big of a part. And then, yeah, this is the bit around pinpointing optimal times. So we can react to planned events. We have actually seen individuals advertise dogfights online. And so we've been able to provide real-time intelligence to law enforcement on that basis. Lifestyle and pattern analysis, as we said, so we can look at recurring patterns to enable us to target surveillance at a particular time. And then lastly, temporal analysis. So we can look at heat maps to see when people are visiting certain areas at certain times. And again, that can then lead to more effective surveillance. And then, yeah, moving on, mapping. So online groups, especially sort of closed groups, online invite only groups, really useful for us. Maybe you could argue they may not be completely OSINT, but that's a different debate for a different day. But yeah, for us, that's really important. And then social media connections using, tools like i2, Multigo. We build those connections out, and actually we store every single. We download, if it's available, we download their Facebook friends, we download their Twitter followers, their Instagram, whatever, TikTok, you name it. We download every single one, and it's inputted into our database and analyzed. And then we mark it as relevant or not relevant. If it's not relevant, it gets deleted because we don't want to hold that data. But if it's relevant, then we'll store it. And we actually collect thousands, tens of thousands of these connections every month. So we have a really good insight into our world. And then the next part, we have used it to avoid surveillance detection. So we have seen that targets will sometimes discuss whether or not they think they may be being followed. And sometimes they're not, and on other occasions they have been. So they will discuss that, and they'll discuss tactics that other agencies or we have deployed, and that allows us to then adapt and look at that. And I feel this is really important because if we don't take this seriously, we lose so much resources on the ground, which are really expensive. So I feel this one's actually probably one of the most important ones, for me anyway, in our world. And then, yeah, really quickly, I wanted to talk about a case study, which was really, I just wanted to give you a bit of a timeline and an idea of how we go about an investigation. So this is based on a real life investigation. It's actually an active investigation, so it's with the police, but yeah. So this is how we worked through it. So the initial part is we were actually looking at dog breeding registries, and we were doing some research on kennels on a dog breeding registry. And we were looking at what dogs had been advertised with wins. We were looking at what dogs had been labeled as, champions or ground champions or so on and so forth. And what we did is we were able to use username matching to find the suspect's Facebook profile. So on the dog breeding registry, it had his username. We were then able to match that to a Facebook profile. And on his Facebook profile, he actually included images of his dogs, which then matched the breeding registry. So again, going back to that corroboration and triangulation, we had that corroboration that this was the suspect we were looking for. As a result of that, we discovered his full name and also his current city on Facebook. Of course, I don't always say that that's true. But in this case, we corroborated it with public records and also some closed databases. And that confirmed both A, his involvement in dogfighting, but also his address. So we were able to link that direct connection between breeding activity and then illegal dogfighting. That led us on to the next part, which was we were able to build out a problem profile and pattern analysis, which was fantastic. This guy actually checked in everywhere that he went. I mean, literally everywhere. He would go down to McDonald's and he would check in at McDonald's. Um, he would go to the 7-Eleven and check in at the 7-Eleven to fill up his fuel in his car. So, you know, he was, yeah, he would share everything, which was great for us. And then, so we built that out, which avoided unnecessary surveillance. And that led to stage 4, which was around recon and drone surveillance. So again, using that aerial imagery to corroborate what was on Google Earth and Google Maps, then corroborate it with this is actually live and now. And actually, it was pretty accurate, which was great to know. And that confirmed injured dogs with facial scarring, which for us is a really key indicator. We were then able to launch surveillance on his home address and capture his movements. And also we did some sort of closer surveillance on the kennels to prove some ownership, because obviously in animal welfare, it's really key that we prove who do these dogs belong to. During the surveillance, and this is where, you know, I think we were doing surveillance for maybe a week, 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks. This is where the key part for us with OSINT came in. Because we already had so much background information, already gathered so much online, we were really able to reduce the amount of time. So in those 2 weeks, we were able to visit him at key times, or tail him at key times is what I should say. And then that led to, during the surveillance period, one evening, he was placing his bins outside, his garbage bins, and we noticed a blood-soaked item that he placed into the bin. And that raised some suspicions for us, obviously. And we wanted to recover it. So we did a trash pull, which was very exciting because I'd never heard. I'm obviously British, and this was in the US. And one of our investigators said, "You know, we can pull his trash," and I was like, "What? Like we can do what?" So this was very exciting for me. I felt like I was in a James Bond movie, and we did this trash pull. And it did reveal crucial evidence which supported the allegations. It was a blood-soaked towel, and that has later proved to be blood from a dog. They did some analysis on it. So we combined all the findings together, which led to an evidential package for law enforcement animal control, who then executed what they're doing. And I'm not going to talk about the next part because it's still ongoing. But I just wanted to give you an overview on how we came up to the point where we got enough for law enforcement and animal control to do what they needed to do. And then just lastly, to finish off, the key takeaway here for me is OSINT helped avoid really expensive surveillance time. It pinpoints key locations and in this case the suspect, and now it's led to actionable intelligence that's led to legal action that's still ongoing. So that's really key for us. Back to you.
That's amazing. Like the work, the process, the end-to-end, like investigative process. Even if you take the subject matter out of it, because it's obviously a very emotive subject, I think, for a lot of people, watching the process from, right, what is the intelligence requirement? How are we going to meet that requirement? The collection of the data, the analysis, the end product production, and then the subsequent resulting. I think that's an incredible case study for anybody who wants to understand how intelligence works, like first and foremost. And then when you add into that, obviously this subject is very close to my heart, it can be really powerful and you can achieve some incredible results.
Yeah, I agree. And actually similar, one of the things I was going to say during the presentation and sort of missed was you could replace dogfighting with any other crime type, right? You know, and the principles are still the same. But I really like methodical process. and structure, and having that plan in place, and doing something with a purpose, whether that's because of the cause, the social good, or just doing our actions for a purpose. It's really important to me.
Yeah, I think also what you've really shown is like OSINT's so broad, and there are people that are
Yeah,
great at social media intelligence. There are people that do geo and can tell you exactly where something is because they identify the rock type or something like that. And what you do is bring all of those things together to show us exactly how all these disciplines interweave and the power open source intelligence gives you with that. And not only that, when you talked about like budget constraints, well, we can do a level of surveillance of a target from social media, especially when they
yeah,
want to check in for every aspect of their life, which is amazing.
yeah. Yeah, it's great, and I think and like you say as well about just the surveillance, the reducing of the time, and budget constraints. I mean, everybody's pushed. I've got friends who work in the private sector, and they say, clients are more demanding than ever. Everybody's pushed, right? And I think, so yeah, doing that more with less is really key. And I think OSINT for me really helps us do that.
No, for sure. So I guess I'll throw it over to the floor. We've got a few questions. Um,
Okay.
so
All
I
right.
can,
Try my best to answer
awesome.
them.
So I can stop talking. So one of the first questions we've had from the chat, um, have you not had any legal issues conducting covert surveillance and then producing products for a court environment?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's tricky, is the answer. It's a very sensitive area. In short, if I split that down into two parts, the first one is covert surveillance in general, and that can be hard. So what we tend to do is use covert surveillance and intelligence products for search warrant applications, not for an evidential environment in terms of for a trial process. That's what we tend to do, to avoid the issues of admissibility. That being said, we have admitted surveillance evidence into UK courts, and it's been held to be admissible. So, yes and no. Depends on the circumstances.
I guess it also depends on the jurisdictions you operate in as well, right?
Yeah, it's tricky, and also, like in the UK, it's also questionable about if we deploy static cameras, whether or not in trespass or not in trespass, whether or not that's permissible or not. In the UK, there's a bit of a grey area. In the US, that would be completely a no-no. So it's about working with what you've got to avoid those legal issues. But yeah, we absolutely have, I'm not going to lie and say we haven't faced criticism before for this type of work. We have. But we try to manage it as responsible as possible.
That's good to hear. Um, so, and look at the rest of the questions we have. So, how did you learn to run covert operations? I think that's a great question, actually, because this is not something you just pick up and decide to do one day.
So yes, I did work investigations for another organization, and I learned a lot of tradecraft there. I conducted surveillance, mainly. Um, so I learnt my tradecraft there, as a whole, and then just sort of formal training, as I've gone on, and yeah, and to be honest, just real world experience, just getting out there and doing it. I think, with OSINT especially, there's no real hindrance anymore, as long as you've got a computer, even a mobile phone, to some degree, you can really learn bits, and pick up bits. So there's a lot out there, and I know the community is trying to do more in that respect as well.
Yeah, I can see one of the questions is mentioning Multigo and recent changes to their pricing model. And I think rather than throw that at you, I think I'll try and address this one. So tools like Multigo or i2 Notebook, they're really powerful at, I think, speeding up investigations and enabling you to collect data at scale. But at the same time, if you're in a budget constrained environment, there are still other ways to collect that information. And I think it's really fundamental because one of the things I think we're very quick at as OSINT practitioners is, all right, how do I automate this, or how do I do it really quickly? without necessarily understanding that collection process. Where is that data coming from, and how would I collect it manually? I think you always need to be aware of how you can extract the same information without necessarily having to rely on third-party software. In some cases, there are likely to be alternatives as well for what you're looking for, with different suppliers, different vendors, community projects. So it's always worth considering that, especially if something which has a community edition has changed how that works, or is suddenly lacking in features that you were used to. I think that's really important. But I will move back to the I'll move back to the questions.
I don't get involved in that side, so.
That's a good one. What is the scariest case you've ever worked on? I mean, you mentioned getting a gun pointed at you earlier, so I feel that might be top of the list, more or less.
Yeah, so yeah, in terms of scariest case, yeah, gun pointing at me was pretty scary. That was an interesting one. I did actually jokingly say to the guy, what are you gonna do with that? I don't know why I said that, but yeah. That did come out at the time.
So British.
Yeah, what are you gonna do with that? I'm trying to think of other examples. We did have one where we were working on a badger case, on a badger digging case, and in the UK, and the gun thing was not in the UK, but this badger digging one was. And the guy sort of like was continuously driving at us. We were on foot, and he was continually driving at us using his vehicle as a weapon. Which was pretty nerve-wracking. But we prepare for these scenarios and we expect them. So it's not completely unusual. And to be honest, they do seem scary at the time, but you're working through your processes. You're like, okay, we planned for this, so it's fine. And then when you get back in the car, you sort of realize, oh shit, we were in a bit of a tricky situation there. And yeah, you do start to reflect. And then you go and laugh about it, probably.
Very similar to a military environment, I think, where you do something and you're like, yep, I did what I was exactly trained to do. And then afterwards you're calming down, you're like, oh yeah, that was hairy.
Yeah. Well, my partner tells me, I don't want to know what you're up to. She always says, I don't want to know what you're up to. I'm not interested. So it scares her too much. But yeah, for me, it's normal life. So
next question from chat. Do you accept volunteers?
yes, we do. So please reach out to us on the website, which is awip.org.uk, or you can just message me on LinkedIn, Jacob Lloyd, and I work for Investigations Project. Type that in on LinkedIn, and you'll find me, and we can chat a bit more.
Amazing. And do you have any events coming up? Any conferences, things like that?
We do. So we have the Animal Welfare Investigations Conference, which is in the beginning of November. So again, type in Animal Welfare Investigations Conference on LinkedIn. It's all on there. I think it's the 4th and 5th, if memory serves me right, but I don't have it in front of me. But yeah, and we're also welcoming OSINT vendors there. So it's a virtual conference. So people can come along and demonstrate their tools and so on, and services to the Animal Welfare Investigations community. We should have people from NGOs, from state, local, and federal levels in the US. So it'll be a good audience.
Oh, amazing. So, let me check the next questions. Are on-the-ground investigations in the United States in any way officially sanctioned, or is it more of a civilian endeavor?
Yeah, so it's a civilian endeavor in that we don't we're not sanctioned by the government. However, we do share all of the intelligence with law enforcement. So yeah, we're not sanctioned by law enforcement, but we will sometimes work closely with them.
Amazing. And how do you find US colleagues to get support in investigations? Because you mentioned how some states you'll need licensed private investigators. You might need specialist support, whether it's on the ground surveillance. And I guess being a UK-based organisation, you can't just fly over and sit outside somebody's house for 2 weeks.
Yeah, so we do have just through networking really. I've built up a sort of database of contacts over the years. I do always welcome people to reach out to me, and and if we've got we'll add you to the list of contacts, and if we've got work coming up in their area, or if they're willing to travel, great. So yeah, just reach out and we're able to expand that network even more.
Fantastic. And would you say it's word of mouth knowledge of people that are sharing information that triggers an investigation, or are you proactively finding things online to then trigger that support with PIs in the US?
Yeah, so a bit of both. To be honest, yeah, it's a bit of both. In the UK, we seem to get a lot of people wanting to come forward about certain things, not necessarily about dogfighting because it's quite limited here, but with certain things that we investigate, especially wildlife crime. But in the US, I think the dogfighting world is insular, and therefore we do need to be a bit more targeted, and therefore OSINT plays a massive role in identifying those individuals.
Amazing. So I think that is all the questions we have in the chat. So
Okay.
I'm going to say thank you very much for your time on a Sunday afternoon, and the sun's out for a change here in London. So,
It's not here, so
so thank you very much. That was really fascinating. I'm going to be in touch about a couple of things I think might be useful for you
sounds
after
good.
this
Thank you.
call. And for everybody on the chat who's watching live or on demand, thank you for watching. I mentioned how you can join the OSINT community, osint.uk/join. Feel free to register to get access to the Slack. It's for UK-based individuals. So you don't have to be British, but you need to have a connection to OSINT within the United Kingdom. But the Discord is in fact open to everyone. So anyone from across the globe that might watch this can still be a part of our community and can still leverage and benefit from all the information that's getting shared. I mentioned our upcoming OSINT Unplugged event on the 24th of September, which is going to be held in Fulham in conjunction with the International Security Expo. And please keep an eye on our socials this coming week because we've got a couple of huge announcements coming up. And our next webinar next month will be with Agent G9 from YouTube, and he's going to be talking to us about how he uses open source intelligence to fight online scammers. It's going to be fascinating. Jacob, again,
Sounds exciting.
thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you.
Cheers all.